Welcome to Business Talk, a global podcast series where we bring you closer to some of the world's most distinguished scholars and their impactful ideas. I'm Deepak, your host from India. Imagine a young naval officer in the cockpit of a fighter jet, somewhere over a combat zone in Iraq. The mission is dangerous, the stakes are absolute, and every decision he makes will affect the lives of the people flying with him. That officer was Dr. David Smith, and the leadership lessons he learned at 30,000 feet would eventually reshape the way he thinks about fairness, equity, and what it truly means to lead. His journey began at the US Naval Academy, where he earned his Bachelor of Science in Oceanography, learning to read the world's most unpredictable systems before going on to navigate something far more complex: human organizations. After 3 decades in the US Navy, lodging over 3,000 flight hours, and commanding squadrons in some of the most demanding environments imaginable, he deepened his understanding of leadership through a Master of Science in Global Leadership from the University of San Diego. But it was his PhD in sociology from the University of Maryland College Park that gave him the academic language to answer the questions that had followed him throughout his military career. Why do workplaces still fail women? Why does real allyship look like? And what must men do, not just say, to create fairer organizations? Today, he is a professor of practice and co-director of the Gender and Work Initiative at Johns Hopkins Carey Business School, bringing the same discipline and precision from the cockpit into the world's most organizational research. As a sociologist, Dr. Smith has spent years studying gender equity, inclusive leadership, dual career families, and allyship, building research that challenges leaders to stop hiding behind policies and start taking personal ownerships of change. He has shared those findings with the world through 3 books, co-authored with Dr. Brett Johnson: Athena Rising in 2016, Good Guys in 2020, and his brand new release, Fair Share: How Men and Women Can Create a More Equitable Workplace Together, published just this month in June 2026. His work has appeared in the Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Financial Times, McKinsey and Company, and Fast Company, among many others. From the Naval Academy to a PhD, from the cockpit to the boardroom to the lecture hall, one message has remained constant. Real leadership means making space for everyone to thrive. Today on Business Talk, Dr. David Smith joins us to unpack the big ideas behind Fair Share and to show us what a more equitable workplaces not only look like, but how we can each help build it. Welcome, Dr. Smith. It's truly an honor.
Thanks for having me, Deepak. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Smith, you spent 3 decades in one of the most male-dominated institutions in the world, the US Navy. What was the moment you realized the workplace wasn't just difficult for women, but that the entire system was broken for everyone?
I think for me that was is very clear in my mind, and that was when, as a young officer, newly married, recently graduated as a student from the United States Naval Academy in the United States, that in this new marriage, in this dual career, dual earner couple, which today is, as we know, is the norm in most of our societies, that we need two paychecks to make things work in most of our societies today. But we also had career aspirations, both of us, and certainly had worked very hard to earn our commissions and to have the opportunity to lead people in the military, and had lots of aspirations and goals, right, that we wanted to reach around our careers. The reality, though, was when we both entered the workplace, that we both had very different experiences. And, I didn't realize that until, of course, we had these conversations and we compared notes about how we were treated at work and our relationships that we had and how we saw opportunities presented to us, how we were mentored or sponsored in the sense of being somebody being there to advocate on our behalf, especially when you're very junior, of even when you're not in the room, and having that somebody there to be able to do that for you is very powerful. and recognizing that very different experiences from me and my wife. And and I think that was the one that began to open my eyes that things were not the same for both of us. They were not fair in many ways. And I was also very curious about how her experiences, how they measured up with other women's experiences in the military, because this is in the 1980s when women were, really first being integrated into the military in large numbers in the United States and many other countries as well across around the world and recognizing that if this is going to be a successful, not just an experiment, but a successful operation in terms of doing this integration and uh, that we needed to do it well and we needed to be very thoughtful about how it was done. And as it turns out, the military tends to be very good at creating policy and regulation around what to do when it came to gender integration, but they weren't so good about how to change the culture and didn't think a lot about changing the culture. That no, the culture that they had is what they wanted to preserve in many ways. And then to think about it from a leadership perspective as well. How do we train leaders to deal with this shift and this change within their workforce and large numbers of people, right? And so it was something that I think was lost on the military in many ways of thinking that they could just integrate women into the units and that the rest of it would just kind of figure itself out along the way. And that was not the case necessarily. And it's taken a long time and we've made very slow progress. There has been progress made, but there's a lot more to be done. But for me, I think one of the key features about this isn't just about women, this is also about men and all of us and the families and leaders out there, is that it affected us in terms of how we were making decisions about our careers and who was going to be, who was going to take, a lead. And maybe in some cases it got to the point for us because it was very challenging to manage two careers like ours in the military at the same time that it just didn't seem feasible to be able to do that. The policies were not set up for that. The policies were really designed for one service member and a stay-at-home spouse. For most part, that was women, wives, to be that stay-at-home spouse. Here we have two service members now serving together, careers separate, and the military just had no idea what to do with that. And so there were a lot of very challenging decisions that we had to make about where we were going to live and what job opportunities we could take advantage of. And then when children enter into the mix, then it even became more complex. And the reality was that while they appreciated the fact that I became a father, they didn't necessarily provide me the opportunity to be a father, right? Well, that's why you have a spouse at home. That's why you have a wife to do those things. And it was this expectation is like, well, she can have the baby and you can go to work. And the reality is that, well, we both need to work and we both need to do some of the caregiving and be able to bring these things together in a way that would work for both of us and our family. And it didn't. It didn't work at all. And so we had to make some shifts and changes for ourselves to be able to do that. And it was really, that was that moment when I really started thinking about, well, at what point can I shift and help to change practices, change policies, programs, things that begin to recognize that there are shifts in our workforce demographics that are occurring, and we need to understand those shifts, and we need to be able to leverage those in a way that we can retain talent, we can manage talent, we can advance talent, because again, just the military, like any other organization out there, we need good people to do the job, and it's just as important in the military as it is in any place else out there. Maybe even more important from a moral perspective of protecting and defending your country. So that was the beginning of my journey, and I always, as I became an academic and had the opportunity to learn and to do research, was to find and do the research that was applied in a way that I could help to shape some of the policies and the opportunities I had to do that within the military. There were a lot of great opportunities where we did shape that policy. And later on, and it was like, okay, so now we've done some of that with the military. How do I begin to expand that now into other areas of our society?
Very insightful. Professor, your research shows that one of the biggest barriers to gender equity is the belief that equity for women means loss for men.
Mm.
What you describe as outdated zero sum thinking. How do you convince skeptical male leaders that fair share is not about taking something away from them?
It's a great question, and it's certainly something that we contend with quite a bit. And we often talk about zero sum thinking, but also it's a zero sum fallacy because it's not true, right? That it's not true that when by removing barriers for women to be able to advance in their careers and as leaders out there, it actually expands the pie. It expands the business, expands the opportunities that we have in our organization and that part of it. The other half of this equation, though, is that today we know that men are looking to lean into more of their caregiving role, their roles as partners, as parents, as caregivers. And to be able to do that, we need to shift and we need to change the policy, the practices we have in the workplace so that we can structure work in a way that works for women and for men, right? So we can balance that and we can have two careers at the same time. We can have children, we can have caregiving responsibilities. At the same time, I have workplace responsibilities and I can do both of those out there. And so for women to advance, men do need to lean into some of these roles. And the great thing about that is that, again, there are lots of, especially the younger generations today, we see more and more of them looking to have those opportunities to be the parents that they wanted to be. And they, increasingly find that when they start having children, that they can't do that necessarily. The workplace is not structured for them to do that. Parental leave is not set up necessarily, if they have it, is not set up for them to be able to take it. Even though there might be a policy to take 6, 12, maybe even more weeks of leave, their managers look at them and go, yeah, but do you really need to take all of that? Do you really need to take any of it? Don't you have a wife at home? All of these questions are things that come up on a routine basis for men as fathers out there. And so there's real backlash. There's real penalties that men are facing when they do take this leave, or if they even come back from the leave and they start to use a flexible work arrangement, for example, or remote work. They're penalized for doing those things. Women are not penalized. In addition to the penalties that are kind of I think, ingrained into their pay structures because there's an expectation that women are going to do remote work. So they tend to value it less and they get paid less already. So they're not penalized on top of it for doing it. But for men, there's a penalty on top of for doing it out there. So again, it's a detriment for both men and women. And again, we're sending signals and messages to people that they can't be the person that they want to be, right? They can't be this whole person and all the identities that they have as parents, as caregivers, as partners, and that work is important to me too, right? But it's not my only identity. It's just a part of who I am, and I want to have all these things together at once.
Because the book talks about invisible work, the care work, the culture work, the behind the scenes labor that often goes unnoticed and uncredited. How does this invisible load silently derail women's careers? And why do most organizations still refuse to acknowledge it?
Yeah, the mental load is something we spent a lot of time working on here and doing research, and it's a cutting edge area, burgeoning area, I think within business and within management, and certainly our fields of kind of beginning to understand it. And for a long time, it was thought of just in the domain of thinking about the home or work or family, and thinking about this invisible work, this mental load. What we're talking about here is not just the physical tasks of doing caregiving, of the logistics of picking up children and getting them to and from places or getting them to a doctor's appointment, of doing the laundry at home or of actually making the meal or something like that at home. It's all of the other hidden part of that that goes with it, right? It's the planning, it's the organizing, it's the anticipating needs, it's the magic making of, as my good friend and colleague, co-author Dr. Leah Rapaner wrote in her book Drain. She talks about this magic making that often falls to women. And this is the idea that, hey, I know it's your birthday coming up, and so I got to do something special for that. And that's something that women often do, not men. And so we have to have your favorite cake or your favorite some special party favor or some gift that's really insightful for you. And that happens at home, but all of these things also happen in the workplace. A lot of the relational aspects around managing people's emotions and difficult relationships in the workplace, often that falls to women. When a colleague is maybe there's a longtime colleague who is retiring, for example, or moving on to another company, and we want to say farewell to them. Who's responsible for getting a card and having everybody sign it, or a gift and have everybody chipping in to do something, or creating an event, a party, or a farewell session for them? Women, these things fall to women more often than they do to men. And this is additional workload on top of the work that they're already doing. And so they don't, and because women are managing a lot more of the both the physical and the mental load at home, they're already, we know, doing 2 to 3 times the amount that men are doing at home. They're balancing all this together. It creates a lot of stress, right? And it's the same thing for men. When men start leaning into doing this work, we begin to feel the same thing. And this stress often leads to, again, poor performance, leads to burnout, poor mental health, poor physical health, right? There's a lot of downside to this if we don't do it well or we don't acknowledge that it actually exists out there.
Professor, you argue that when men don't do their fair share at home, women automatically lose their fair share at work. Can you walk us our listeners through that direct connection? And how does caregiving inequality at home translates into a career selling at the office?
Yeah, it's this again, this idea that again we know from the research that women are in general doing a lot more of the work at home, including the mental load part of it, and that again that takes a toll. That takes time away. That takes time, physical time, but it also takes their thinking, right? Their ability to manage things, so that when they go into the workplace they're having to contend with this and again not having the same opportunities and they're often seen that they're not as flexible or available when it comes to work and that gets translated into commitment. People see, oh, well, she's a busy mom, and therefore she's not committed to her paid work because she's more committed to her caregiving role. That may or may not be true, but the fact is that that's the way they're perceived. And so we don't give them the same opportunities. We don't provide the same levels of opportunity for advancement and for promotion, these key roles and responsibilities that we know are so important in advancing us in our careers because we think that they're not ready for it or they're not available to do that kind of work. And so this is one of the ones where when we as men lean into our roles at home, we see in the research that it makes a difference in several different ways. One, obviously they begin to support their partners' careers in the same ways that women are often supporting their husbands' careers in heterosexual couples, but it also affects the children. And so we see when the children see their dads leaning in and doing this work, um, it really makes a difference in terms of how they think about work and family and those roles when they leave home and they enter into the workplace. So for our sons, they have a more balanced perspective about looking at gender roles like work and family. For our daughters, they're more likely to persist in their careers, reach many of their career goals and dreams, and enter into non-traditional professions and industries that have been a long time majority male and male dominated out there. And so there's that part of it. And then the other really interesting thing that we found in our own research was really looking at how men's behavior changed when they were doing this at home, how it changed their behavior at work. And it makes sense, right? In the same way that women have to shift and adapt to because of their requirements or what they're having to do at home, that impacts their availability at work or maybe the type of work that they're doing or the level of work that they're doing. We see something very similar for men, and men begin to again talk about caregiving differently at work, and many junior men often told us that they really appreciated when they had more senior male role models at work who would talk about work-life integration and what that looked like when they were doing it. And they said that they were very transparent about who they were as caregivers and what that caregiving responsibility looked like, what they did, how they managed it. And they said it really helped them to reinforce in their mind about that one, that this can be done, and two, this is what it looks like. This is what a this is what an example of that looks like. And one of the ones they talked about was this idea of leaving loudly. And they said that when senior men had to go, for example, take maybe their kids to the doctor and they had to leave work a little bit early, or in the middle of the day, they had to leave to go take their kids there. They didn't go out the back door real quiet and try to hide it. They went through the front door. They told everybody what they were doing, why they were doing it, when they'd be back, and they normalized it. And this is something that women have talked about for so long, that they've had their caregiving has been stigmatized, and it's something to be avoided, and it's something we shouldn't be talking about at work. And men felt the same way, and that now today, if we're more transparent about it, and able to talk about what it looks like and role model that in front of everybody, suddenly it begins to shift the culture, and it changes the practices and how we think and talk about doing caregiving and balancing that or integrating that into our work.
Professor, research cited in your work suggests that 96% of women see real progress on gender equality only when men are actively engaged as allies. Yet many men today feel anxious about mentoring women after Me Too movement. How do leaders breathe that fear and move from hesitation to genuine action?
Yeah, we hear this all the time from organizations and from leaders, and especially from men out there, about how they're concerned. There's a real fear factor, anxiety factor. Me Too certainly worsened that, and we saw that in our own research before Me Too and then after, about how that became worse in terms of men engaging in talking about relationships with women at work, and any sort of formal professional role, or even friendships at work. And it got to the point where men were, it wasn't even about just mentoring women. It's like, I'm not going to have a meeting with a woman with the door closed. I'm not going to be seen having a meal with a woman, having lunch with her or dinner. I'm not going on travel with women. I mean, it was really almost absurd as you think about the fact that we have these very mixed gender workplaces and teams, about how can we actually function and how can we actually get the work done if we're thinking about it that way. And I think that one of the things we always like to remind people is that if we think about what are the signals, what are the messages we're sending to people? If I as a man, a male leader, say that I'm not willing to travel with women, what does that say about those women? And then what does that say about me? Right? That I don't, excuse me, don't trust myself, or somehow don't trust her. Right? And it can't do those things. So, excuse me, there's a messaging there that I think is really important that we need to really begin to think about. I also think that as men, we need to lean in and really begin to think about how do we take control of that narrative and recognize that the reality that what is it that we're anxious about? What is it that we're afraid of? That these false narratives around women are going to make false accusations. The research doesn't bear that out. That around sexual assault or sexual harassment, this is one of the places where there's the least amount of these false narratives and allegations out there, false allegations, and so not likely to happen out there. And so the only true way to get past some of this is for men to begin to do a little more what we might think of as exposure therapy, and doing more of the mentoring, doing more of the meetings, and working together more closely, and being able to normalize that and understand that, hey, the reality is that we can do this, we can do it safely, we can do it in a way that we can all be productive and work together, and toward, again, the common interest and the common goal that we all have out there. And we see this in so many organizations today, and that women so appreciate, and that's where this research comes from, that when men do show up and do the work and talk about it and measure it, gender equity in the workplace, and are transparent about why this is important to their team, that it makes a difference. Women see that, and they can actually feel like there's real progress being made in their organizations, as opposed to some of these very performative programs that we've seen across organizations where it's just more lip service and there's not real change or shift happening within the workplace.
Professor, flexible work arrangements were supposed to help working parents, but the book reveals that even when men take advantage of flexibility, women end up picking the slack. Why does flexibility alone fail? And what must organizations do differently?
So part of the challenge with flex work is that it, for a long time, has been seen as a women's program, right? This is designed somehow for women. The reality is something very different. We see that flex work arrangements, which includes hybrid and remote work, right? Basically, anytime anybody's taking time to work outside the physical workplace, that is part of flex work. And even before COVID, there was more access to flex work arrangements, including remote work, for men than there was for women. Yet women still took 10 more hours a week than men did when it came to flex work arrangements because of the need. But it was the type of roles that had flex work available to them. The access piece of this is really important. And recognizing that, okay, and there's a lot of places where you can't find flex work because of the nature of the work, right? In healthcare, for example, service industries, for example, manufacturing in places that are outside of plants, right? And working outdoors. A lot of those are, again, there's no flex work necessarily tied available to them. But a lot of the other places there are today, and certainly around tech, we certainly a lot of the professional industries out there, more white collar work as we think about it, there is a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of advantages to flex work. And we are seeing a shift, right? So post COVID, there was a about a threefold increase in the United States in terms of how many people were doing flex work on a weekly basis. And before COVID, it was less than 10%, and today it's over 25%. And we're seeing an increase in 2025 that was just reported out last month over the last year, which is telling us something, right? We're seeing a lot of signals about this return to office mandates in many companies today that is really about the leader and it's really about their comfort level with their employees or with their workforce. And it's not necessarily tied to productivity because we know that productivity and performance goes up when there's remote work or flex work arrangements available to them out there. The workforce is happier, they're more productive, they have higher levels of performance. So, of course, that translates into our businesses as well. So it's not a necessarily a correlation to that, but certainly we see lots of companies today are beginning to recognize that they need because there's a demand signal, and they're seeing the business case to why we need to have more of this. Um, it was interesting. 2 years ago, there was research done in 2024 that showed that there were job ads started advertising more requests or more opportunities for flex work arrangements. And it was kind of curious to see that why all that was happening. And then, of course, in 2025, this is where we start to see the actual people going into those jobs. And now we're seeing the increase around flex work happening and more people using it today. So I think it's here to stay. How far will it go up? I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it will go up a whole lot more, but I think flex work is part of work anymore today. There's an expectation that certain kinds of work and types of work will certainly benefit from a flex work arrangement. It helps families, it helps people to balance their lives, and unless there's a really good reason to have a more formal and rigid work schedule, I think companies are going to be forced to do a certain amount more of the flex work arrangements.
Professor Fairshare focuses on three key areas. And the first is rethinking company culture and the structure of work
Mhm.
itself. What are the most stubborn cultural norms, the ones that look neutral on the surface, but are quietly reinforcing inequality every single day?
I think one of my key ones that I always focus on is about transparency in the workplace. And this is one that again happens in so many different ways about what kind of information is available to employees, what's shared with them. And this is everything from pay to who gets parental leave or the actual take rates around parental leave or access to all sorts of benefits when it comes to flex work arrangements. And a lot of that is hidden, and it's really challenging. And I think it's also challenging for when we think about the culture when it comes to just kind of the broad nature of caregiving. And this is where employers today are so hesitant and fearful in many ways of asking their employees about what their caregiving status is or what their caregiving needs are because they're concerned that in some way they might be infringing upon their rights and they might get sued or might be litigation brought against them. And then employees on the flip side of this are really hesitant to divulge their caregiver status or their needs because they're worried that they might be discriminated against or they might not get that opportunity for that promotion or advancement. And so they don't share that. They hide it, they cover it. And so we get this gap. We talk about this as the caregiving conundrum of how employers and employees they we have this gap between them that it's really hard to close without some transparency in there and finding a safe way to have that transparency so that the employer can understand their caregiver population. They can understand the fact that what we know in the research is that about over 70% of our workforce at any one time identifies as a caregiver. And are we providing the right benefits? And again, are they just guessing at what benefits they need to provide employees? Is it more about children? Do they have a younger workforce where it's more about children when it comes to caregiving? Do they have a more balanced workforce or an older workforce? And we certainly see, again, demographic trends today in the workforce showing we have an aging workforce. And so people are living longer. They're having to work longer because of the cost of living today. So they're working longer in there. So that means that many of us are often at the point where we might be doing caregiving for a partner, a spouse, or we might be doing caregiving for an aging or ailing parent. And some of us, almost 50% of us, if you think about the millennial generation, our sandwich generation. And that means that we're caregiving for children at home that are under 18. At the same time, we're doing caregiving for aging, ailing parents who are over the age of 65. Um, but most employers don't see that. They don't know it. They don't have that information. And so we're running around blind. And I mean, that's no way to run a business. And so to us that, we've got to find ways to increase that transparency. And again, we provide some of the examples of ways companies are doing that today. But I think we need a more systemic way to do that across the board for everyone.
Professor, your second focus area is going all in on caregiving options and employee benefits. What
Mhm.
does all in actually look like in practice? And what is the cost to companies that offer benefits on paper but quietly penalize the employees who use them?
Yeah, two big issues here, right? So all in is back to understanding who your caregiving population is, and what their needs are. What's actually going to work? What do they need, and what are they going to use? And then what are they going to have the ability to use? What are they comfortable using, and or have managers who are trained to implement the policy? And I think this is a big gap in many companies today that senior leaders are creating policies, well-meaning, well-intentioned policies to support caregiving needs of their employees. The challenge is they look at it and they, after 6 months or a year, and they go, well, nobody's using them in the way that we wanted them to be used. And the challenge is that managers have not been trained on how to implement the policy in a way with their workforce and their teams. They don't understand completely what their options are when it comes to replacing somebody when they go out on paid leave, when they use or they're away doing flex work. What are my options when it comes to changing work structure? If the company has a general policy, can I change that within my team or within a particular region? Is there a reason for it in a particular function to have a different work structure than other functions within the business? And again, there are a lot more questions than there are answers here. And until we've trained and provided the tools to our managers, it's going to be really hard to see the take rates, right? And when it comes to using the benefits and being all in on the needs of taking care of your workforce out there.
Professor, many organizations have gender equity policies on the books, but culture eats policy for breakfast. The book's
Hmm.
third pillar is making gender fairness routine through process and policy. How do you ensure that these changes are institutionalized and don't disappear when leadership changes?
So one, we first need to formalize the practices that work that we want to instill and make sure those are across the board in our organizations. And two, we have to have accountability for this. And I think that accountability requires leaders to actually measure the things that matter in the company. And we spend quite a bit of time in the book talking about ways and using different kinds of frameworks to think about how can we measure the things that really matter within our company, that we care about those outcomes, right? That are going to help us to make decisions. They're going to help us to hold others accountable for the kinds of outcomes that are important to us and that we're looking to reinforce within the company. So really comes down to we have to understand the best practices and instill those, and we summarize those within the book. Then also to create that accountability, we've got to be able to measure. We've got to be able to measure what it matters and do that in a way that, again, leaders have actionable data to be able to work with and they can move forward on.
Professor, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. If a CEO or senior leaders is listening to this episode right now, someone who genuinely wants to act but doesn't know where to start, what is the one fair share commitment you would ask them to make tomorrow morning when they walk back into their office?
I think the place I would start, and we often do this with leaders and with companies, is to help them to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and think about what is it that I'm not seeing, I'm not understanding, I don't have awareness of. And that could be around caregiving, but it could be broader than that. And I think that the first thing that leaders need to do is begin to understand, where are the sore spots? Where are the things that I can be working on? And that's going to require data, right? And that data could be listening sessions. We could start with listening sessions and being able to really kind of hear and understand in a qualitative way what it sounds like, what it looks like, and then how do we begin to broaden that out across our organization to make sure that we're covering all the different groups and different functions and aspects of our company, and we're not missing anything when it comes to that. So then we have the data to then think about, all right, now where do we want to go with it? But developing awareness and developing transparency around this, I think, is one of the big things that many leaders and many companies miss. They're so busy, again, trying to make profit, trying to make the next quarterly. Those are all important things, right? Of keeping the business profitable and moving forward. But from a long-term perspective of managing our workforce and managing and make sure we have the best talent there available to do the work, I need to spend some time understanding the data and ask those questions that many leaders don't want to hear the answer to. And sometimes it's hard. It's hard work. And the reality is that, you know, good companies and maybe not so good companies all have the same issues, right? Nobody's perfect. We all have flaws within our organizations led by humans. And it's just a matter of uncovering those and finding those so that we can begin to solve them. And that's what we as leaders do. We solve the problems, but without data, without knowing, understanding what the problem is and developing that awareness, it's really hard to do.
Professor David Smith, this conversation has been nothing short of inspiring. From the cockpit to the classroom, your journey reminds us that true leadership is never about holding power. It's about sharing it. Fair Share is not just a book, it's a call to action for every leader, every manager, and every colleague who believes that a better workplace is possible and is willing to do something about it. For our listeners, if today's conversation is stirring something in you, pick up a copy of Fair Share: How Men and Women Can Create a More Equitable Workplace Together. Available now. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and keep the conversation going. Dr. David Smith, thank you for your time, your research, and your commitment to making workplaces fairer for everyone. It has been a true honor having you on Business Talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.